episode 218 Above Ground podcast, the Ketamine Diaries, with return guest Rob Leathen.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Coming at you live with real conversations about mental health from the peer-spective, it's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now your hosts, TPP and Will Foley.
Yeah, Timmy, dude, it's time.
The Ketamine Diaries with Rob Leathen. Welcome back, Rob. Last time we had Rob was 2 years ago?
March of 21. Wow.
Episode 94.
Damn.
A lot has changed since.
Yes. Why don't we just hop right in and tell us what's changed? And I know you had kind of kept some diaries of your experience. So love to hear about it. Love to hear about how it worked for you.
Yeah, absolutely. It all started many, many years ago just kidding. Last year, so which would be 2022, around July or August, I was doing really good. Well, I was doing fairly good in my own journey. I got to a point where, after 4 years of therapy, that it's like, okay, if this is the best I'm going to get, I can live with that, right? Like, it may not necessarily be a rich and fulfilling life, but you know what? I could live with it. But I knew there had to be more. There had to be more. So, like I mentioned, part of my journey is being open-minded and willing to try everything to see what works and get rid of what doesn't. I did some research, found out about ketamine. I contacted a few people that in my network or that I knew were experienced with ketamine. One of them was a guy down in the States, retired, I believe he was Marine, created this is a shameless plug for him, created a company called Mental Joe Apparel. And I actually talked with him. We phoned, and his company sells clothing to raise money for alternative therapies for first responders and veterans, for alternative therapies like equine therapy and ketamine therapy. So I talked to him quite a bit about that, and it was my conversation with him that helped me make my decision that, I'm going to try it, right? Be open-minded, see if it works. So I did some research, found a clinic relatively close to where I live in Toronto. So contacted them and I went through the process of evaluating whether I was suitable for ketamine, which involved getting a medical referral from my doctor to I guess try the ketamine or participate in the ketamine therapy. I met with a psychologist who ran me through a battery of questions, and they both together recommended that I was a candidate for ketamine therapy. So the place that I used in Toronto was called Field Trip. There's I think 4 field trip locations in Canada, and there's I think a handful down in the States. And I made contact and got reached out to them, made contact with their intake line, and their intake person got back to me, and that was the start of the process. So the way Field Trip in Toronto, the way they ran a therapy session they scheduled 6 weekly therapies. Well, let me restate that. Once a week for 6 weeks. that was a ketamine session. And then within that 6 weeks, there was 4 integration sessions, they called it, which were where you sat down with a psychotherapist and integrated what you had experienced into, basically try to make sense of what you experienced and how it relates to what your goals were. So that was kind of neat. So first of all, I got to tell your listeners, there's a word that I learned called ineffable. Ineffable means unable to be described by words. And that is exactly what each ketamine session was like. It hard to put into words. So much so that I actually took notes. I got like 7 pages of notes here of each experience. So just to help me.
That's awesome.
Just help me remember.
The actual process of the ketamine, was that the 6 weeks?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And during I'm taking notes too as you're talking.
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm typing away at. And I'm really like, I'm interested in that whole, so was it a treatment integration session treatment? Is that how the protocol sort of followed because of the 4, or
Yep.
did it actually, or did you have like a final integration sort of thing?
There was a final session with the therapist as well. So field trip in Canada, I believe, because of regulations and all that, field trip, they use there's 3 different ways of administering ketamine. One is via IV, but that in Canada, at least, that requires certain regulations be followed if you're going to do it through IV. So it needs to be, administered by a doctor who is able to do IVs and things like that, like an actual, I think it's a respiratologist because ketamine is ultimately a anesthetic. It's got to be administered by if it's being administered by IV, it's got to be administered by a medical doctor who is able to administer anesthetics. You can take ketamine orally, and that's the way that field trip and my sessions went, where I know it sounds bad, but it looks like a small urinal hockey puck. It's small, and you put it under your tongue and you let it dissolve and it gets absorbed that way. And the other way is through nasal sprays. So the clinic that I went to, field trip in Toronto, they do it orally. So the way the session would start is you would meet, first of all, no eating or drinking for 4 hours before, because ketamine can upset your stomach if you swallow it. And that's brutal, especially if your session is in the afternoon and you're like, I wake up, I want to eat. You're required to have somebody drive you home. From firsthand experience, there's no way I would have been able to drive, after a session. I go in and field trip in Toronto. They've spent a lot of money on the environment as well. So when you think about ketamine sessions, one train of thought is the environment, the setting is really important. And there's other clinics where it's not the set, or their I guess their direction is its setting is a lot less important than the actual administration. So in Toronto field trip, they spend a lot of money on the setting as well. So the minute you walk in, it's like a welcoming hug. You got one wall behind the admin person. It's a moss wall.
It's like a spa, I would assume.
Yeah. That's that kind of feeling. Lots of rustic wood. It was in an old building in downtown Toronto that was renovated. Right, so it's it's almost like a loft type thing. The environment was really good.
And just so our listeners know, in New York, there is a field trip in New York City. It's actually located at 137 East 25th Street on the 11th floor, 10010. So there's several locations. There's a Toronto, there's a Vancouver, there's a New York, there was a couple others also I saw.
The way the session would start, you'd show up, you'd relax in the waiting room area, which, had nice plants and a couch and TV going with calming, meditative type music and all that. So it really helps you calm yourself before.
Get in the zone.
yeah, absolutely. And
we've actually had a lot of conversations with other people about therapy and different types of therapy and about set and setting. And it's also about intention too, because your intention, I'm sure, is a bigger part of how the session is going to go.
Yeah. So the way the session would go is you'd be directed into your room. And again, it's not a lot of stuff in the room, like from furniture, things like that, but it's not clinical. And the way Field Trip had it, there was a nice little globe light right in the middle, and you could have them set it to any color you wanted. Whatever makes you, it's about making you feel comfortable and relaxed. And then, you're in this gravity chair, where it goes back and it feels like you're floating, which eventually does come into play. And then, like I said, the therapist comes into the room. Well, first of all, the registered nurse comes into the room, takes all your vitals. Depending on your own medical status or status, they will sometimes put monitoring equipment on you. So for me, with high blood pressure, they decided to put the monitoring stuff on. So a little fingertip sensor that detects your blood oxygen level is connected to a wrist thing that measures your blood pressure, body temperature. So it maintains it maintains monitoring of your vitals, and it transmits that wirelessly to a tablet that they have outside the room. So you get in the chair, you get relaxed, you take your shoes off, you talk with the therapist that comes in, and you basically talk about maybe a little bit about what your last session was like. It's not an integration session, right? It's talking with the therapist before your session, right? You talk a little bit about what your intention is, and they stress the importance of an intention. I liken it to telling your subconscious what it needs to work on. You get your dosage, and for me, each session the dosage increased, and it was up to me whether I wanted it to increase or not, and I wanted it to increase each one. By my 5th session, I was at the maximum dosage, right, that they're allowed to administer. So you set your intention, you start, you put the sublingual tablets under your tongue, and they want you to, at least in Field Trip, they want you to swish it in your mouth, but not swallow it. Because if you swallow it, it makes you nauseous. So you're swishing it back and forth in your mouth for 15 minutes. While that's going on, the therapist is doing a guided meditation with you, right? So which is, and there was a couple that were really good. At the end of the 15-minute mark, or basically by the time that guided meditation is finishing, you're starting your trip, right? And at that point, so for the 15 minutes, you're swishing, you're listening to the guided meditation, you're looking up at the light, and for me, I would notice that at some point, my tongue would start to tingle a bit, and I'd look up and I'm looking at the light and I'm looking at the shadows of things, and the shadows started having color. So at that point, it was like, okay, it's happening. I'm on my way, right? And then at the 15-minute mark,
so it's that much. I didn't realize, even like I thought it would be like kind of like scratching the surface. That sounds like you're pretty much in it.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Well, depending on the dosage, you get more and more in it. And as I describe each session, you'll see how that changes. But
did your intention stay the same for each session?
They start out the same. Well, no, the intentions for each session are different. Like I set different intentions for each session. Sometimes that intention, I think, had a play in what I experienced. And sometimes the intention, what I experienced, wasn't related in any way to the intention. But at the 15-minute mark, the therapist comes over and you sort of spit/dribble, because you're sort of out of it, into a little cup to get rid of what's left. They'll put the headphones on with music that you've selected, and they'll put a blindfold on, and then they lay the chair back and you're into your trip. And the first session was more to introduce you to ketamine. So, I started at the minimum dosage, and I remember when I started into the trip, it was like, wow, this is really cool. Like, with the dosage I had, I still had the ability to consciously think most of the time. So it was like, okay, like I'm starting to see colors and shapes, flowing shapes and colors, and I had enough consciousness to go, I wonder if I can impact the colors that I see, or change it, try to control it, which, as a person with PTSD and first responder, it's like, okay, I want to try to control things, right? And it's like, nope, I can't change it. I can't control it. And at first, when I first got into the very first session, it was a little overwhelming, because it was like, holy shit, I can't control anything, right? And it's like, and I started to get a little overwhelmed. I was aware of what was going on. And it's like, and then I finally said to myself, you know what? I got to just let go, and whatever happens, happens. And for me, that was the first actual insight that I actually got from it. And I realized that, like, after the fact, but it was, we hear it all the time in words, let go, you just need to let go of things. But for me, up until that moment, they were all just words. But when I actually let go and gave into whatever was going to happen, it actually gave me an experience of actually letting go. And it was sort of like taking that concept that we describe by words of letting go, and making it an actual experience where I experienced letting go. And that was a pretty big one for me.
Did you actually feel that freeing of something happening for you at that insight moment? Or was it, because you said that you had that insight a little bit later on into this journey? So was it that moment happened, you didn't quite know how to respond to it at the moment, and you banked it, and then all of a sudden, as you became a little bit more aware of yourself and the ability to open up to it, did it open up a little further for you, which allowed you to feel that later on?
Well, the actual cognitive process of letting go when I was in the middle of in the trip, that for me, it felt like a physical thing that occurred. And it wasn't until after the session, when I really started evaluating it and analyzing it, and being the first responder, overanalyzing it, when I realized that, holy crap, I just was able to put that concept into practice and experience it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking. That's exactly what I was asking.
Yeah. That I got into it, and I remember had enough consciousness thinking, you know what? I'm always looking up because I'm laying down, right? But I looked up and I'm thinking to myself, I could be dead right now, and they could be doing CPR, pumping on my chest, and I wouldn't even know it. I was like, Okay, well, whatever it is, whatever happens, happens, right? So for me, my first trip was more just colors and no real life images, but just patterns, fractal patterns, right? And they were flowing. For me, I could tell when I was starting to come out of the trip because colors and everything would start to turn very dull and less vibrant, and almost turn to shades of black and gray. And when I saw that happening, it's like, okay, I'm coming out. So I'd come out, and the one thing that Field Trip did is they also have a camera in the room, so they're monitoring, watching the video of you, right? So when I came to, and I was sort of out of it, but there still, as you're coming out, I realized I was smiling. I have no idea why. And they even said to me, yeah, we noticed quite a bit of time during your trip, you were smiling a lot. Okay, it's cool. I don't know what that means, but so the best part was driving home downtown Toronto. My first session was like at 1:00 in the afternoon. So it's 4:30, start of rush hour, downtown Toronto. My wife's driving, and you're still under the influence of the ketamine a little bit. So I'm sitting there in the car in the passenger seat, and I'm looking around, and I see these massive, office towers, and I see lots of cars and people walking. And it felt a little different for me. And this is where a lot of things I describe, I have to use analogies to get the concept apart. But instead of looking at individual puzzle pieces, like there's a person, there's a building, there's a bus, there's a car, it was like I was looking at the completed puzzle, not just individual puzzle pieces. And it was like exactly at that moment, I realized, like, oh, wow, everything's connected. My second session, the week later, we upped the same process. I said, you know what? I see myself like as a hard-edged cube. And my intention is I don't want to be that hard edge, with the points. I'd like to have like rounded edges, just be a little bit softer as a person. Right. So that was my intention.
When they up the dose, do you get a longer period of time that you're in the room or no?
A little bit. But for me, every time we'd increase the dosage, it didn't really increase the length of time of the trip, but how much deeper into the trip you went.
Yeah, it was about an intensity thing more than a duration thing, because that's up in anything like that is just going to intense the feelings of it and what comes up through it, and anything like that. And my experience with any of that stuff is at least taught me that anyway.
Yeah.
Whatever you're carrying throughout the day is going to come out in it too. So
yeah. And I got really, really sad coming out of the trip. And it's like, I'm crying. It's like, okay, well, the trip's over, whatever. It wasn't until afterwards that I realized that what that probably represented to me was, and this is what integration sessions are like, you're trying to figure out what message was sent to you in what you saw. And it was like, okay, well, I was sad. The colors were subdued, which is, kind of a downer, I guess, right? And feeling sad, really sad, not that I'm crying, that when I'm coming out of, it wasn't until the integration session where we sort of made the connection that, well, you know what, that sadness that I was experiencing as I was coming out really, really wasn't necessarily the sadness of the trip ending, the sadness from a 30-year career, seeing all that stuff that I'd buried was coming out, right?
Shedding some skin, I guess.
Yeah.
It was like opening a black hole, man, literally. Like you literally opened the black hole of yourself. And that's like, I mean, you literally are getting into the dark night, literally, like physically, or at least subconsciously anyway, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Rob, were you, because I know the first time it sounded like you were anxious going into it, and when it kind of started the process, was that there the second time?
A little bit, but nowhere near.
Okay.
No, because it's like, okay, I know I can't control things. So there was no need to control things. I had the experience of the first session to experience ketamine. So yeah, that apprehension was not gonna lie, there was a little bit there because it was only the second session, but it was nowhere near as pronounced as the first session. From those two sessions, it's like, okay, well, yeah, everything seems to be connected in some way. I actually got to understand what it really means to let go of things, to be able to let go. I actually experienced with the second session, I think my first real growth point of letting that sadness out that you buried over a 30-year career, right? Just letting that sadness out, or letting go of my hold of that sadness to let it out. Being the first responder with PTSD, I don't make a good passenger in a vehicle. I need to drive, right? That way I have control of everything. But this, after the second one, driving home, I actually put the seat back and I dozed off. The things that I got from ketamine weren't direct, hey, this is what it feels like to let go. It's those indirect things like, yeah, I was tired and I had a nap in the car, which I haven't done for decades. So I got to explain it. Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. That's what it's actually used for in the hospitals. So what it really does is it's sort of, in a conceptual kind of way, it sort of separates your ego from your subconscious. So it affects those parts of the brain that implement your ego. When you're processing these things that are happening within your trip, there's absolutely zero ego involved and zero ego to get in the way. The first two trips, I was observing what was going on. I could see the colors of it. The third trip was much deeper, and it was like I was no longer observing what was going on. I was part of what was going on. Again, colors and patterns, but they were flowing like waves. But the thing was, as the waves were going through the colors, I felt like I was the waves. So I felt like my body was part of it, not watching it.
I kind of got that when you had mentioned the first session with the buildings and the bus. It's like you were all part of. There's no you. You know what I mean? You're it's all there. That's pretty cool. That's gotta be a weird feeling.
It comes into play a little bit later on.
It sucks that it takes that sort of assistance to get to that point, but it does go to show how complicated the human mind is, because it takes these chemicals to unlock other chemicals in our brains under the right circumstances. And I still think personally, in a lot of other ways, if you do it smartly on your own, but that's my own personal opinion. But so as we go on through these sessions, did you start to put the common denominator together? Like, we're going through 6 sessions here. So was there a fabric like weaving for you together, like a tapestry, or like was it piecework at this point?
Right now, at that point, it was still a piecework. Little pieces of, well, there's what it feels like to actually let go, and okay, there's sadness that came out, there's flowing and not being able to control. There's just individual pieces that I hadn't put together into that complete picture just yet. I am not religious in any way, but at one point near the end of, well, it wasn't near the end, it was about halfway through the trip, almost like a silo, like a farm silo, but I was inside looking up and there was no top. And during that trip, and again, it's not like a clearly defined silo. It was like, okay, whatever, the image is, this is what it's like, I guess, being inside a silo. And I started to raise up towards the top, the opening, and I'm going. And I remember I thought to myself, holy crap, like I'm being open-minded about it. And it's like, I feel like I'm being led up to meet something. And I actually thought to myself, like, am I about to meet God? Right. And as I was breaking through the top, unfortunately, my body said, guess what? You need to go pee now. And it's like, okay. And I was at the point where it's like, okay, it would be embarrassing as hell to pee. And I always went to the bathroom before a trip, always, just to make sure that never happened. But it happened. And my body basically, or my brain, I'm not sure which one, basically said, nope, we're stopping it right here, and you're going to go pee. So,
it allowed you the space because it, for some reason, it like connected the body's message that you had to go pee, I guess.
Maybe it was my subconscious saying, you're not ready to see what I was taking you to see. And the only way to stop that is to bring you back to, I don't know. I really don't know. And so they sort of.
You're not the only one having this conversation, because when you Google ketamine and the God molecule, you find tons of stuff. And I had only heard of the God molecule through like DMT assisted therapy or whatever, through whatever that was on Netflix that I saw, but I didn't, and I've always known the connection to psychedelics and spirituality, because as in my experience with those things, I've felt things that I didn't feel on one thing versus another. But it's amazing that it what it does is that connectedness, it breaks down that invisible membrane that we believe is there, that's really not there, I don't think.
So they helped me stagger to the bathroom, right? 'Cause I'm halfway through it, so I'm in the depths of a trip, and when I went back, and I went back in the chair, it's like, okay, no, nothing's really happening. So I just used the rest of the session as like a meditation session, right? The funny thing about this trip was there was a doctor there who was studying to become a psychiatrist, a young guy, very interested in psychedelics and wanting to be able to use psychedelics as a psychiatrist, right? Which is great. So he was part of my session. And afterwards in the like the recovery room, which is a nice room with essential oils vaporizing, different teas, big beanbag chairs, really nice colors that you could just relax in. He was there and he was asking some questions. What was your trip like? What was this and all that? And I had forgotten all about that sort of cone rising up. And I remembered it at that point. And I said to him, I said, yeah, this may sound kind of strange. And I described it, like a silo raising up. And he said, oh, yeah, okay. He said, that's actually fairly common. I go, okay. And he described a couple of other patients that he had been with in there. And I said, yeah, he had one person where it was a lady where it wasn't a silo going up, but it was a long tunnel that she was going down towards. So it's more common than you would think. Now, does that mean there's a God or not? Who knows? All I know is I actually felt like I was being brought up to be introduced to something or experience something. Now, the other thing that was really good about this one, remember I said there were waves of colors and I felt like I was the waves. Right after that trip, I can honestly say my brain felt, or my mind felt, incredibly clear, and it stayed incredibly clear. And the way I describe it is, you got to use your imagination with this. Picture a glass pail, like a 5-gallon pail, and it's filled with marbles, those little glass balls that we used to play with as kids. Then you take gum and you chew it and you throw in a whole bunch of pieces of gum in that pail of marbles. So in that pail, you've got marbles, you got gobs of gum, you got goo sticking to different marbles. All it's like that. For me, it felt like those waves that I felt like I was actually part of. For me, the only way I can describe it is like those waves or whatever washed over the marbles and cleared out all the gunk, all the gum and the sticky, gooey streamers everywhere. And that's the way I felt. Like my mind felt much clearer.
That's so crazy that it kind of swept everything out there for you to.
That's what I'm taking from it.
That's incredible, man. You're a very, very good spokesperson for this type of treatment, especially considering your background and considering where you've come from and where it's amazing that in the last, so you're our third repeat guest this year. So thank you for that. And it's 4 years for us this year. So we're having people back. So it's amazing to hear where you've come from and how far you've gone.
Yeah.
And there's so much other stuff too, besides all of this. So as this process unfolds, where do you find yourself now in all of this process?
Let me explain. I got to explain one aha moment. After that session, my wife and I went out for dinner to a local pub that we go to every week. We went on a Thursday. It was busy. We walk in. There's only one table available, for a table for two, right in the middle. And I'm talking, this is busy. So we sit down and I'm talking to my wife. And all of a sudden I get this look in my face. And my wife goes, this is about 20 minutes into, just getting our food served. And it's like, she looks at me and goes, what? Is everything okay? Right. And it's like, I said to her, do you know, I haven't once felt the urge to look around to see who's sitting behind me. I hadn't felt the urge to look over the half wall to the bar area to see what's going on. It's like, it was almost like my hypervigilance was virtually gone. And it's like, that was one of those aha moments. Like, it just sort of snuck up on you when you realize, oh, hey, there's no. And the other thing that happened that was a defining moment for me was my wife and I went to see a comedian, Jeff Dunham, at a local arena. It was done in an arena. So we're sitting there. We get there early, like I would always do. But we get there early and sitting there with my wife, and the people are starting to file into the arena and the seats around and the seats on the floor. And it's like, okay, I can feel the anxiety starting to build with the people, and I'm looking around and my eyes are much wider now as I'm looking around and trying to track everything that's moving. And, I thought to myself, this is stupid. We're all here for the same reason. We're all connected. Ties back to the very first session. We're all connected. We're all here for the same reason, to watch this funny guy on the stage. And the anxiety, gone. So those two things were like real eye openers for me, that, wow, hypervigilance was like almost gone. And the hypervigilance was one of my really more problematic symptoms that stuck around. So yeah, that was good. The fifth session is when I started to see real images and that I could identify that, oh, okay, that's what that is. And funny part about this was the way it looked. It was sort of like a panel of screens, and some of those screens had images on them and some didn't, and those panels would move and roll out of view, and another panel come in with different,
like stage scenery.
Yeah. And within each monitor that was on there was images of just things. But there was one panel that came up, and it's like I recognize exactly what that image is. It was of a toddler in a diaper riding on one of those yellow ducks. It's a yellow plastic duck with red wheels and the red handles. And I realized, holy shit, that's me. And it was like the subconscious was showing me a memory, and I'm watching it as like a third person, like, holy crap. And that one really shook me a little bit. It's like, yeah, I know right away that that's me. And I know that I'm not consciously thinking that. So it's like, that's the subconscious coming out, right? And so it was really, really incredible. I can honestly say that the ketamine therapy gave me my life back. It really did. Like, I got to a point in my therapy, regular therapy, where it's like I was stuck, couldn't go any further. And I think the ketamine helped me get unstuck, and also helped me deal with some of the things that I had buried, that, like the sadness, the fifth session, it was only two kinds of colors. There was reds and oranges and greens and blues. And they just kept coming. And every time, the red and orange images or colors would come up, I felt warm. And every time the blue and green ones would show up, I felt cold. And there were a lot more of the green and orange, or green and blue ones, the coldness, and I got to the point where I was really, in my trip, I was really begging for more of the reds and oranges. And what we sort of figured it out to be was, the reds and oranges and feeling warmth represented, in an abstract way, all the calls I've been to that were good, that had a good ending. And all the blues and greens and the cold represented all the calls I've been to over my career that didn't have a good ending. And it's like, okay, that sort of makes sense. So the integration sessions really help you put or learn from what you experienced during your trip. It worked for me. I haven't talked to anybody that's tried ketamine where it hasn't worked. All the psychedelics, I can see them slowly becoming more accepted as mainstream. For me, I say that in my overall journey, there's three things that have absolutely made a difference. One was EMDR therapy, two was equine therapy, and three was ketamine therapy.
Do you know, I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to this stuff. Is this something that people are supposed to revisit, like down the road again, or is this?
So it really depends on the individual.
Okay.
And what they experience. Now, I will say now, which is 10 months after my thing, I don't have the same feelings as I had then. Like, when I say feelings, I mean the overall, like, whoa, this is amazing. But that, I'm just writing that off to the, okay, well, I'm getting—
You're probably used to it. Yep. That's exactly what I was thinking.
Now, having said that, I am curious.
Well, you've already hit it. That's what integration is.
Yeah.
Like that,
yeah.
You don't notice it. Like that's what it is. That's why you do it. That's what it's
like,
called.
I can tell you now, the benefits are still there. My hypervigilance is still almost negligible. When my mind is idle, it's no longer going to the bad thoughts and the rumination, and the actual benefits are all still there. The clear mind, I think it's still there. It doesn't necessarily have that same intense feeling as it did when I first went through it.
I still wanted to ask you about your boots on the ground organization, your peer organization for your first responders too, because I don't want to overshadow one for the other.
Okay. Yeah. Boots on the Ground is a volunteer organization. It also has charitable status, and it provides a 24/7, 365 1-800 number that first responders and veterans, anybody struggling, can call. It is totally anonymous. We don't subscribe to call display or anything like that. We don't ask who you are or what service you work for. We do ask, are you police, fire, EMS, corrections, nursing, other? And sometimes, like when I'm a call taker, and I'll ask the person's first name just so I can have a conversation with them. In the 4 years in existence, we've done over, I think what the latest stat is, like we've taken 2,800 calls. And of those 2,800, there were, I think, a total of 9 that were from actively suicidal first responders. Now, the one thing that again, everybody, it's a volunteer. Nobody gets paid, not even the founder. Like it's all the money raised goes back to, the training for the volunteers. So that, yeah, nobody's making money from this. The one thing that is nice is we have a rule. It's an unofficial rule that we don't turn anybody away. If somebody phones and they're not from Ontario, we're not going to say, well, sorry, you're not in Ontario, we're going to hang up. And no, we do what we can to help them. So we have taken calls from the East Coast of Canada, because a lot of times you Google peer support, first responder, and boots on the ground shows up. So people will call it. And that number works right across North America. I've taken calls twice now from a corrections officer in Washington State. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to say, oh, well, you're not from Ontario. Sorry. Right? No, if somebody's phoning boots to the ground, it's because they're struggling and they need help.
Well, that would actually go against what you stand for if you didn't take the phone call. I mean, in reality, because that's what peer support is.
So yeah, boots on the ground. It's all the call takers are either active or retired first responders. Many of us have lived experience with mental health challenges. So yeah, it's an amazing organization. They really look after their volunteers. As in, like, we have a psychologist who oversees. She's like the mental health oversight. So if we have, a challenging call or something like that, the organization can discuss it with her. I have her number. If I take a call and I'm struggling or from that call, or, I'm not sure if I handled that call right, I can phone her directly. Say, hey, wow, hey, what do you think about this? Or, I'm a little off from that call, or right. So we have
what a great organization, man. This is great. You should be proud.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? I am. It's an incredible organization. They're opening up a chapter in Alberta, and that should become operational later this year. It's I can see it eventually going nationwide, right? Eventually. And the founder, he sees it as well, but he wants to make sure it expanding naturally happens at a workable rate, and that the product is still high quality product. So
keep the boots on the ground still, basically.
Right.
I'm kind of just curious. I know it'll be hard to kind of pinpoint like a one word or a sentence maybe, but through the treatment, I heard you say a lot of letting go and clarity. Is there like a sentence that you could just sum up your treatment?
Life altering in a good way.
Cool.
I say it again. It gave me my life back.
That's the sentence right there, baby. It gave me my life back. Wow. See, now that's real progress for us all. Like, this is the beauty of this, man.
Right.
Everything with you again and everything. Rob, thank you so much for being here again, man. It has been an absolute pleasure.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think people need to hear it, man. You're a great spokesperson for this, man. And we thank you for that, man. And thank you for all that you do for your community. And thank you for being an exemplary peer, man. You go to show what this is really all about, man. We pick ourselves up every day and
Yeah.
prove that we can rebuild and help others rebuild, man.
Ever since ketamine therapy, I no longer approach situations with my brain first. I now approach situations with my heart first.
Wow.
That's perfect, Timmy.
Wow.
No other. That's
drop.
a mic drop. Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Until next week, get well.
Be safe.
Okay.
Stay
Thanks, guys.
above. Yes.
Stay above. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Rob.
guys.
Thank you for giving us a listen. New episodes every Wednesday. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can share, rate, review, and even subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Other ways to support the show: follow us on social media, share the content, share our episodes. You can also buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/abovegroundpod. For further concerns, show ideas, or just to say hi, you can email us at abovegroundpodcast@gmail. Once again, thank you for listening and supporting mental health. Keep the conversation going and stay above.